Good morning. We'll call this meeting of the Forest Land Advisory Committee special meeting to order. And do we have to do introductions? We do introductions with the nine of us. Don't we know each other? Or should we do introductions? Does anyone feel the need to
I think
introduce
it,
themselves?
Madam Chair, I think it's more for
For
the
the
public record,
public.
but
Okay. For the other, oh gosh, it's up to 21 now. All right. I'm Margaret Magruder, Columbia County Commissioner, Chair of the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee. Commissioner Scar,
Sure, Commissioner Aaron Scar, Tillamook County, Vice Chair of FTLAC. Pass it on
Willie,
to, okay.
Commissioner Willie.
Good morning, Jerry Willie, Washington County Commissioner for District 4.
All right. Shall we start with Mike Wilson and go round the rest?
Sure. Good morning, Mike Wilson. I'm the State Forest Division Chief for ODF. And we have Tim Holschbach here with us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Holschbach. I serve as the interim deputy state forester here at the Department of Forestry.
Brandon and Mike, you want to follow along?
sure. Brandon Persinger, I cover natural resources for the Association of Oregon Counties and am the executive director for the Council of Forest Trustland Counties.
Mike Buffo, senior forest economist with Mason Bruce and Gerard and consultant to the Council of Forest Trust Land Counties.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. It's not pouring rain here in St. Helens at the moment, so we'll look for skies that don't open up on us. I hope everyone else is doing well. So we will open the public comment and I'm assuming Justin, you'll manage that.
Absolutely.
Is there anyone who would like to make public comment this morning?
Yep. If you're online, just please use the raise hand feature there and we'll get you in for comment. And while we're waiting for that, we did not receive any email public comment for this meeting. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so Madam Chair, I think you can move along if you'd like.
All right. Well, we're not very popular. Nobody wants to comment. Or maybe we are popular and we've done everything right. The next thing on my agenda says comments from the Board of Forestry Chair, the State Forester. They are not on. Neither of those folks are on the meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think Kate is, State Forester Skinner is otherwise obligated today. And I'm not sure about Jim, but I think he may actually be out of the country at this point. You know, he was had some travel plans over the holidays. Tim, was there anything that you had?
Oh, as always, looking forward to listening into and joining the conversation today as we keep moving step by step through this process. So thank you all for being here and knowing that there's a lot of weather going on right now and other things are pulling at us, but appreciate the time.
Well, I'm sorry that Chair Kelly isn't here to join us today. I think it's always important that we kind of learn together on these things. This is certainly a learning process as we move through these discussions. So a focus of the recent Forest Trust land meetings has been potential timber harvest levels from the state forests as modeled under various scenarios by ODF staff. And the model results were very informative, showing what harvest levels could be given the forest's inventory and growth rates and the habitat conservation plan mandate to provide greatest permanent value. While harvest levels are a topic that get a lot of focus at the Board of Forestry, the greatest permanent value includes multiple aspects of which timber harvest is only one. And these aspects may be overlooked by the Board of Forestry since they generate less revenue and are less frequently discussed in public comments. For example, camping is one of the larger sources of non-timber revenue, providing the department $365,000 a year, which is less than Columbia County gets for camping. The camping program also provides Oregonians with the opportunity to experience the state forests. And we hope to hear today about how ODF will provide other non-timber aspects of greatest permanent value. Furthermore, since we've heard from ODF that staffing may not always be adequate to fully provide greatest permanent value, we're interested in understanding what ODF staffing needs are in order to provide that greatest permanent value. So in the long run, we'd like ODF to be able to provide greatest permanent value by providing county revenue, timber for local manufacturing, timber and non-timber jobs, and the values enumerated in the Oregon Revised Statute 629 035-0020, which are sustainable and predictable production of forest products that generate revenues for the benefit of the state, counties, and local taxing districts, properly functioning aquatic habitats for salmonids and other native fish and aquatic life, habitats for native wildlife, productive soil and clean air and water, protection against floods and erosion, and recreation. So it's a big list, it's a heavy lift, and we look forward to hearing more from ODF today about these aspects of greater permanent value. So I will turn it over. Mike Wilson, are you the one that gets to lead this
I am.
presentation
I am the
from ODF?
lucky guy, although Nick has to do most of it. So, but
Where's Mike?
I'll get to kick us off. Okay. Thank you, Justin. All right, yeah. So thank you for that introduction to what we're here to talk about today. I mean, we've talked a lot about harvest levels, obviously, and a few other things as well. But as you say, today is a little bit of a shift, and happy to know that commissioners, want to understand more about the other parts of the plan. So this is, an informational meeting to try and describe some of those. We do have this presentation that we'll walk through. But feel free to interrupt at any given point with questions. We'd like this to be a pretty casual conversation today as we roll through a kind of a litany of strategies that are in the FMP. So what we'll talk about today basically are the non-timber focused goals and specifically a little bit about the historic and cultural resource protection and tribal relations goals, transportation, soils, recreation, habitat, and carbon. And then also anything else that you might have questions about that we're not covering here. Okay. So before we get into the details of the draft forest management plan itself, I'll just provide some context for its development, mostly for folks who may not be totally aware of how this works. So ODF does manage state forests for the greatest permanent value to the state, which has defined by law as healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems that over time and across the landscape provide a full range of economic, environmental, and social benefits. Actually, I got those in the wrong order. Sorry. Social, economic, and environmental benefits to the people of the state of Oregon. And then to secure that greatest permanent value, the state forester shall maintain these lands as forest lands and actively manage them in a sound environmental manner to provide sustainable timber harvest and revenues to the state, counties, and local taxing districts. As you referenced earlier, Commissioner Magruder. If approved, the Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan would replace the current Northwest Oregon and Southwest Oregon State Forest Management Plans, and also the Elliott State Forest Management Plan. And I just bring that up for reference here because there's been a little confusion, I think, because the Elliott State Research Forest is kind of on its own path. And a lot of people have been a little bit confused about that in the rulemaking notice. So we do have, I think it's between, it's somewhere around 9,000 acres of Board of Forestry lands that are in and adjacent to the Elliott. And those historically were managed under the same forest management plan as the Elliott State Forest. And we haven't changed that because we were working on this new plan that replaces them all. So when people see the Elliott referenced in the rulemaking process or the Elliott Forest Management Plan, that is not the current Elliott State Reform. It's just about the Board of Forestry parcels that we still need to transition to a new plan. So the policy context for development includes the Oregon Revised Statutes. ORS Chapter 530 really describes all the state foresters' management of both Board of Forestry and common school forest lands. There are about 24,000 acres or so of common school forest lands in this plan area that are actually owned by the Department of State Lands and are ultimately under the authority of the State Land Board. But we have a management agreement with DSL to manage those lands. And then the Oregon Administrative Rules. So as you mentioned, OAR 629, Division 35, those rules further define the social, economic, and environmental benefits that constitute that GPV or greatest permanent value, and the planning process also to achieve them. And so we'll provide a little bit further detail on how the FMP addresses GPV later in this presentation with some of these goals and strategies, and how we're also using the forest land management classification system to kind of describe how that looks geographically on the forest, because that forest land management classification system is how we sort of divide the landscape up into buckets that sort of describe the management emphasis. And that's not the same as forest land classification that's done on the fire protection side for establishing that. Totally different thing. So, all righty. Okay, so this slide that we're looking at now presents a simplified high-level way of visualizing the scope and scale of our various planning levels. ODF's planning framework includes 3 levels. So there's a high-level policy sideboards piece, and that is established by the Forest Management Plan and the Habitat Conservation Plan. So in terms of conservation strategies that have historically been in our forest management plan, those are addressed in the HCP. Your riparian protections, your terrestrial habitat protections, leave trees, downed wood, that sort of thing, that's addressed in the HCP. And so the forest management plan is really the more overarching document that describes all the goals and strategies. So outside of what the HCP addresses. So when people are comparing like our current forest management plan to this draft that's out there now, and they're like, wow, there's a lot of specific stuff missing around that, it's because that's in the HCP. So, and the HCP ultimately, it really does provide compliance with the Federal Endangered Species Act for 17 covered species. And so when we get the HCP and those ITPs, those are going to be the policy for state forest incidental take permits come with an approved HCP, allows us to implement the HCP. And that becomes the policy for state forests and managing under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And so it is still a fundamental underpinning of the forest management plan. So the FMP goals specifically are distilled into more specific objectives. There are implementation plans that are geographically discrete and time-bound. So typically those have been decadal, and we anticipate that they will still be decadal plans going forward. At least the first set of implementation plans under this forest management plan will be a decade. So, and they do set objectives that are a lot more discrete, like a specific harvest volume, other projects that we want to do during that time, over that 10 years. And that's really where you'll see, we've had the discussion with the board about performance measures, and we have yet to see how that's all going to shake out. But at the end of the day, that's really sort of uh, if you will, the time-bound piece of performance measures that we would like to have, the board weigh in on. So we report back and they give us feedback on how we're doing there. And then finally, we have our operations plans, and those are currently annual. We have them every year that detail specific upcoming operations and projects that are fulfilling the implementation plan objectives. We're thinking, in the future, we would love to move to a biannual operations plans, so that we don't have to go through the process every year. But we'll see. At first, right now, we're still working off of annual operations plans. So all of these planning levels also are subject to their own tribal and public engagement periods. So that is one piece of it. We have this, we're currently in the public comment period for the draft FMP, of course, but the IPs and the AOPs also have their own public comment periods. Yes, Brandon.
Thanks, Mike. Don't mean to interrupt your flow here too much. Just wanted to verify. My understanding is, right, annual operation or annual operating plans and IPs, you're in the process of doing those, but is the FMP, or not the FMP, is the HCP at this point pencils down, for lack of a better term? Or are we still going back and forth with the feds?
So it's almost pencils down is I guess how I'll put that. Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically we've worked through a lot of the issues. We're going through some or final walkthroughs now with the services to make sure the document is in a state whereby they can complete their biological opinions and their of course the NEPA process, the EIS, and all the stuff that has to be finalized to be able to get those incidental take permits. Of course, we'll never say that the services won't say anything is final until it's final, right? So, I mean, fair enough. But yeah, we're really close, and we are anticipating, uh, well, they have set the objective of having those incidental take permits in the June timeframe of this year. So that's good news. They came back from the shutdown, ready to get back to work, and it is a top priority for them. So there's that. That said, we'll see what the long-term fallout in their capacity is. So I wouldn't want to put any words in their mouth in terms of guaranteeing a time frame or anything like that. Okay. Okay. Oh, hey, I get to hand it off to Nick already. All right.
Beautiful. Good morning, everybody. Nick Palisato, Deputy Chief, State Forests. So I'm going to take some time now to walk through the FMP itself. I'll focus primarily on our management approach and on some specific goals and strategies that speak to non-timber values. So there's 4 chapters. Chapter 1, just pretty much straightforward introduction. It describes the purpose and scope of the plan. It includes the guiding principles, talks about the lands that are governed by the plans, how it by the plan, and how it relates to other plans and processes. There's also a few major plan themes that are called out there and then addressed throughout the document. And these themes are greatest permanent value, engaging all Oregonians, climate change, sustainability, and adaptive management. I'm not going to present chapter 1 here, but you'll hear those themes woven throughout the other chapters. The management approach is in chapter 2, and this provides a vision for how the management of resources is integrated across the landscape to sustainably deliver a diverse array of benefits to Oregonians. Chapter 3 then provides a description of the current condition of forest resources to provide the context for management. That's a requirement in rule language that we do so. And then it also includes the goals and strategies for each forest resource in the planning area. And then chapter 4 is the general guidelines for asset management, plan implementation, adaptive management, and public revision, or sorry, public engagement. Okay, on to the management approach. This is chapter 2. I'll give you a brief primer here. This is the approach is intended to provide a vision for what management will look like across the forest during implementation, and what the public will see on the landscape when they're visiting the forest over time. So it's a relatively high level vision for management across the forest to achieve greatest permanent value and address those other major plan themes of sustainability, which includes providing a sustainable and predictable flow of timber and revenue to states, counties, and local taxing districts. So it's a broad definition. Climate change, with an emphasis on promoting resilient forests for the future, tied to our climate change and carbon plan and the 20-year strategy. Engagement with all Oregonians, and adaptive management, which is our pathway for testing new ideas and adjusting to changing conditions. The management approach is not intended to provide instructions for implementation in the field, so it's not the how-to guide. Those instructions reside in the goals and strategies, or furthermore in our policies and in the implementation plans themselves. What it does provide is landscape context to address how different areas are managed for different objectives and how the forest as a whole provides for greatest permanent value. And one way to think about ecosystem function and the related social, economic, and environmental benefits to people is in terms of ecosystem services. And so we here adapted some definition that came from, some big UN global document that categorizes ecosystem services into 4 groups. The first group is provisioning services, and these are resources that forest ecosystems provide, and they include goods such as food, fuel, and timber. Timber is indeed an ecosystem service. Other products and mineral resources, also services like clean air and water, and revenue for our state and county partners, for the state and our county partners. It's also important to note in this framework that timber and economic benefits to local communities aren't incompatible with other values or benefits. They're simply part of the many services that the forest provides. Next up are regulating services. Forests help regulate many resources, including water, climate, and carbon. Then supporting services. Forests support the function of many important systems and processes, including nutrient cycling and soil formation, primary productivity, and biodiversity. And then finally, cultural services. Forests provide for recreational, aesthetic, spiritual, and scientific benefits and values as numerous and diverse as the people that use them. Thus, ecosystem services include all the social, economic, and environmental benefits that are required under GPV or otherwise desired by the public, such as carbon storage and drinking water, which aren't specifically called out in GPV. Many of these services are recognized and embedded in greatest permanent value and reflected in the guiding principles for management plans past and present. And managing for ecosystem services provides for community well-being at local and state levels. In addition to identifying many important outcomes that contribute to community well-being, the concept of ecosystem services creates a framework that recognizes how social and economic needs are supported by healthy ecosystems, and how society itself also provides services to those ecosystems by supporting their functions. So this diagram is intended to illustrate that reciprocal nature of our relationship to the forest ecosystem and the importance of active management, which is obviously a key tenet of greatest permanent value, to protect, maintain, and enhance ecosystem services. So on the left side, you have ecosystem services to Oregonians, as I discussed in the previous slide. And then the right side lists some of the many services to humans, some of the many services that humans provide to ecosystems, which include things like cultural and natural resource stewardship, habitat restoration, pest management, and reforestation strategies. And this isn't to imply that forest management is just about ecological function, but ecological function is key to the sustainable provision of the services that we desire from these state forests. And it's particularly relevant within the context of climate change and promoting resilience in managed forests. So under this new FMP, we will use what we are calling an ecologically sustainable approach to forest management. This term comes from existing literature, a number of papers, including a sort of foundational paper by a team of scientists from 2012. That paper frames retention forestry, which is a subcomponent of what we do in this context of ecological sustainability. Table presented here is adapted from their work and then modified to reflect state forest considerations. So an ecologically sustainable approach to forest management is about ecosystem services and about promoting resilience to address uncertainty and risk. This approach is to sustain and support the ecological integrity and productivity of the forest and thereby improve resilience and capacity to adapt to change over time. Key to this approach is active management for multiple values at multiple scales. And this figure is intended to illustrate how ecologically sustainable forest management can be used to promote healthy, resilient, productive, sustainable forest ecosystems by managing at multiple spatial and temporal scales. So on the left, we have conservation areas, a key feature of a ecologically sustainable approach. It ensures the habitat protection, and these are then distributed across the landscape, which improves both the resilience and the function of those conservation areas. In the middle of the figure, we reference some of the considerations for landscape scale management. This includes things like compositional and structural diversity, which we'll talk about in the habitat strategies, both of which are really important components of resilient forests. Also, habitat connectivity and other things are more operational, like the location of harvest units and roads on the landscape. And then on the right, we list some of the stand level considerations, including young stand management, harvest types, biological legacy retention, and pest management. And obviously, these aren't exhaustive lists, but through consideration of multiple values at multiple scales, we work to ensure sustainable provision of greatest permanent value and its associated ecosystem services. Timber and economic benefits, again, timber and economic benefits to local communities are ecosystem services. And in our business model, as you know well, timber revenue is the primary vehicle to pay for all of these other ecosystem services. This isn't in conflict with this management approach. It's just important context for state forest management. Ecologically sustainable forest management can look different on different ownerships, depending on contingent on the mandates for those ownerships, fed, state, private, etc., tribal. The fundamental premise here is that healthy, diverse, productive, resilient forests maintain and enhance ecosystem services and the varied benefits the public derives from them, and are the foundation upon which a sustainable working forest model is built. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, how does this actually play out on the landscape? There are specific management strategies to increase resilience to climate change and other disturbances, and the trade-offs considered, and they will vary across the landscape depending on the specific emphasis of particular areas, as designated either by this forest management plan or the habitat conservation plan, and our forest land management classification system, as well as other laws and policies. The management approach in Chapter 2 describes how strategies to improve resilience and adaptive capacity vary according to emphasis by framing it within the context of the forest land management classification system. That the classification system's defined in administrative rule, and it's a method of describing the management emphasis of parcels of state forest land and the appropriate range of management activities that will apply to a particular area of the land base. It also identifies when a particular forest resource may need a more focused approach in its management, or possibly an exclusive priority as designated by this forest management plan or the HCP or other laws. The information is then used in the development of implementation plans and during operational planning. And as I said, on state forest lands, timber revenue funds the majority of management activities. And these funds are also the primary vehicle for providing economic benefits to rural communities across the state. Thus, emphasis on production-oriented goals and related silvicultural strategies will take priority on a significant portion of the landscape through time. Production of timber will be the primary objective on general stewardship lands, with consideration for long-term sustainability of the timber resource. It's also important to note, however, that general stewardship lands actively managed for timber also provide for other ecosystem services such as clean water, carbon sequestration and storage, and wildlife habitat. Next category in the forest land management classification system is focused stewardship. On focused stewardship lands, specific resources require heightened or focused awareness, and management strategies are designed to maintain and protect these resources. Examples include things like cultural resource and recreation sites. High-value conservation areas are intended to be managed for a specific conservation value. Habitat conservation areas and riparian conservation areas designated under the Habitat Conservation Plan are examples of these HVCAs. Special use areas are managed for a specific use, and management activities are limited to those that are compatible with that specific use. The Tillamook Forest Center and utility rights of way are examples of special use lands. And then the recreation, education, and interpretation program is interwoven throughout the landscape and all emphasis areas. The differences among emphasis areas provides for diverse recreational activities and experiences, as well as opportunities to educate the public about sustainable working forests and functional forest ecosystems. In this framework, the types and proportions of services that any given acre contributes to will depend on landscape context. But the forest as a whole provides the full suite of services that the public demands from state forests. And in this manner, the entire forest is a working forest, both in the traditional sense and within the context of providing for greatest permanent value. Okay, this conceptual map is intended to provide a hypothetical example of how these emphasis areas might look on the landscape. The figure on the left shows the riparian conservation areas in blue and a habitat conservation area shaded yellow in the upper left corner. The unshaded areas represent mostly general ground with a timber production emphasis. And the circles highlight different types of harvest units on the landscape, including regen harvest and thinning both inside and outside of the habitat conservation areas. And the goals for harvest vary by emphasis area type. The figure on the right shows how different types of recreation, interpretation, and education opportunities are dispersed across this landscape. Off-highway vehicles, hiking, other trails, they're not limited to specific emphasis areas. Dispersed and traditional campsites provide both diverse and inclusive camping opportunities. And day use areas like the Tillamook Forest Center provide for interactions with interpretive and educational materials about the roles of state forests, past, present, and future. Just as an aside, like I have a little vision where maybe like on the left side of this figure, for example, there's a hiking trail through this, glorious old forest, classic in all its ways in that conservation area. and it leads right out into that managed forest landscape. And there's a big interpretive sign that says, "Welcome to the working forest." And it explains what these harvest units are doing, what they're providing for the public and for local communities, and how the whole landscape works together to provide for all the values. Okay, let's move on to chapter 3. Oregon Administrative Rule for Forest Management Planning requires that the plan provides a description of the current condition of various forest resources, as well as goals and strategies for each of those listed resources. There are 13 resources addressed in the plan and listed here. I'll mention the goals for, I think, just the cultural resources, and then I dive into the strategies for some of the resources of interest today. Just to review, management goals are statements of what the state forester intends to achieve for each resource within the planning area and consistent with GPV. Whereas strategies describe how the state forester will manage the forest resources to achieve the goals articulated in the plan. The strategies identify management techniques that may be used to achieve the goals during implementation. Okay, I'll spend a few minutes now to walk through each of the tribal and historical cultural resource goals and strategies, and then like I said, I'll finish with a few examples for other goals. The tribal cultural resources goals are rooted in shared stewardship, and staff worked with tribal representatives from the natural resources and cultural resources clusters in the government to government forum to help develop them. This language reflects very careful conversations with the tribes, I think, is the point of that statement. The goal, as you can see, this one here is about engagement and the resources themselves that they use. There are 4 strategies. The first is engagement, and the intent is to ensure that significant cultural and natural resources are recognized and integrated into our planning and management activities. We're meeting with them semi-regularly now, both at high levels and at staff levels, and trying to sort of foster those relationships and figure out how to incorporate that into our planning processes. 3 other strategies for this goal. The first is an ethnobotanical strategy, and the intent is to integrate considerations for planting and cultivation and management techniques to promote culturally significant attributes. The second is around tribal seed sources, and that's just about identifying and cultivating partnership opportunities with established native nurseries, including but not limited to the Coastal Native Seed Partnership, Oregon Department of Agricultural Seed Bank, and tribal seed nurseries. And then the 4th strategy is around access. And the intent of this strategy is to implement processes necessary to allow protected tribal access to state forest lands. ODF and the tribes will build their understanding of locations and logistical needs for accessing culturally significant locations and forest resources. Okay, the second goal is around protecting cultural resource sites, including but not limited to archaeological and historic sites, historic artifacts, and real property. The first strategy is really around relationships here, and the intent of this strategy is to promote better communication with the tribes about potential impacts of forest management activities by developing tribal engagement policies and procedures to ensure ongoing consultation and coordination. Another is a cultural resource inventory, and the intent of this strategy is to work with our tribal partners to develop and implement cultural resources protection processes and strategies associated with all forest management activities to help identify and protect culturally significant resources. Another strategy is around cultural resource awareness, and this applies both to our staff and the public. And so the intent is to provide ongoing education to ODF staff and state forest visitors so they understand their role in cultural resources protection. And then finally, establishing intergovernmental agreements. The intent is broad and may include agreements such as codifying communication processes, these cultural resource and natural resource protection strategies, and land management partnerships. This relates to historic cultural resources. The goal is just simply to identify and protect them. The intent is to incorporate historic cultural resources review by qualified cultural resources specialists in compliance with state and federal regs into our planning processes to ensure protection of historic cultural resources across our lands. Okay, there are two primary strategies for our transportation system. The first revolves around planning, the second around assessment. The intent of the planning strategy is to create and manage a lasting road network that maximizes efficiency and minimizes the impact on other resources. And the intent of the road strategy or the transportation assessment strategy is to provide for a road assessment and monitoring to ensure that the transportation system is providing for achievement of greatest permanent values in a safe and efficient manner that minimizes impacts to resources. That. Take a sip of coffee here. Okay, soil. The intent of this strategy is to encourage ODF to plan management activities to protect and maintain the organic content of soils on a landscape scale and to increase carbon, water, and nutrient storage. Carbon. The intent of the carbon strategy is to consider long-term carbon storage in concert with other goals. Some areas of the forest, for example, the conservation areas and inoperable areas, will have limited or no harvest or timber management, and they're expected to store a substantial amount of carbon. While in contrast to other areas with a production emphasis are actively managed for wood products, we might be seeking to restore underproductive stands and treat harvest residuals differently, which also increases storage. So we're both sequestering and storing across the landscape. Okay, moving to aquatic strategies. There are a couple of strategies around water quality, specifically drinking water. The intent of the drinking water effects analysis is to assess and coordinate at the implementation plan level the pace and scale of harvest in drinking water source areas that are managed by ODF. And then for TMDLs, the intent is, simply to meet TMDL standards. The establishment of our riparian conservation areas and other HCP riparian-related conservation actions will contribute to the protection of high-quality drinking water. Various strategies for aquatic habitat. The first, just sort of a broad strategy around habitat for associated species. The intent is to promote aquatic ecosystem resiliency, including high water quality and healthy stream flows, and to benefit the species that depend on these habitats. Important to note that habitat conservation areas also contribute to aquatic habitat, also have aquatic habitat benefits, are also contributing to things like cool water and reduced sediment. headwater processes. The intent of this strategy is to ensure that ODF will leave some slash, coal logs, and downed wood and snags following harvest operations to protect headwater processes. The HCAs will ensure large proportions of the landscape remain intact, and the RCAs will ensure that these functions are maintained in harvested areas. The Habitat Conservation Plan riparian conservation strategies include riparian protections to improve water quality and habitat conditions. Functional landslide processes. So, as some folks may or may not be aware, some landslides are good when they bring the right things into the streams, maybe primarily wood and gravels, and they're natural. And so there are places where we do want to account for that functional process that puts desirable things into streams, right? The intent of this strategy is to ensure that woody debris will be delivered to streams and ultimately enhance aquatic habitats by identifying slopes that could fail and retaining trees on those slopes. For wetlands, the intent is to maintain wetlands across the landscape and just thus provide multiple beneficial functions for various species, buffering and dissipation of floods, which is relevant right now, and improved water quality. Okay, strategies for aquatic organisms themselves. The intent of that strategy is to maintain or enhance connectivity of vegetation types and species, habitats, and also to reduce road-related mortality of native animals. For partnerships, the intent is for us to coordinate and partner with various interested entities that have mutually beneficial goals, provide needed capacity, and leverage resources and expertise. Okay, then for T&E species, both aquatic and terrestrial, the intent of the strategy is simply to comply with state and federal ESA requirements and the HCP while also managing for other species of concern. So the HCP provides for when we get the HCP and the associated incidental take permits, that is essentially our ESA compliance tool. It also provides for coarse filters for other species. Remember, GPV says to manage habitat for all native species. I think it says protect, maintain, and enhance. All native species, right? The HCP is really focused on species associated with specific habitat types, primarily old forest. That leaves a gap, potentially, for some species associated with other habitats. And if you recall, under our current plan, structure-based management, we take this coarse filter, fine filter approach to species management. So the desired future condition complex stands, the terrestrial anchors, the aquatic anchors, those things were the coarse filters. We still do every implementation plan species of concern assessment. So basically we sit down, we compile a list, we update the list using various resources to say what are the current species of concern, leaning heavily on ODFW's conservation strategy. We line that list up against all of our coarse filters, and these are the habitat conservation areas, the riparian conservation areas, our leave tree strategies in harvest units, to some extent, what are inoperable areas, filling gaps, etc. So we look at those things, and then we say for each species, is there anything we haven't done, or is there anything that is not, anything about their habitat requirements that has not been adequately addressed? If there are, we may require additional strategies. We would add a fine filter strategy for that species. Fine filters are species and site specific, and they're generally of minor or minimal impact or complementary to operations. Examples include things like protecting rock outcrops and caves of known use by bats. Creating and retaining smaller diameter short snags on ridge tops in areas of known purple martin occupancy, and implementing seasonal restrictions near known active nest sites. Point being, these aren't big new constraints. They're very site specific. In many cases, there aren't even constraints. They're entirely compatible with the activities we're already doing. And we lean heavily on the things we're already doing to provide the bulk of the lift. But this coarse and fine filter strategy ensures we're managing habitat for all native species as required under GPV. And it also helps work to prevent future listings. Okay, moving on to the next one. There's a goal for habitat diversity. We're still managing for diversity at stand and landscape scales. The intent of this strategy is to conserve and enhance diversity as it promotes resilience and ecosystem function, which provides for many ecosystem services and public benefits. Managing for diversity helps ensure the full suite of habitats of native wildlife persist on the landscape, in spite of any short-term disturbances or chronic perturbations. To be clear, the HCAs will provide the majority of late cereal stands, and the total amount of late cereal forest, older forests increase therein over time. There will be early and young stands and mid cereal stands, both inside and outside of the HCAs, and those contribute to the diversity of habitat types on the landscape. Our riparian conservation areas and leaf tree strategies provide for some older habitat components in that managed timber emphasis landscape. Operationally limited areas also will contribute diversity and differences in age class structure. So it's HCAs were designed to account for the range of forest types and most of the habitat features at each district level. But we still kind of want to look at rare, unique, and otherwise vulnerable habitat types and features that can be addressed with those fine filter strategies. The whole forest is providing for habitat diversity. Any given stand is contributing to some extent, and the differentiation of stands across the landscape is a further contributor at a larger scale. Young stands are important outside of habitat conservation areas as a contribution to diversity. There's lots of early young forest associates, not to mention, the habitat requirements of big game. Okay, habitat complexity. We're also still managing for complexity. Again, the habitat conservation areas do a lot of the work. And at the stand scale, we're relying on those areas, and then also the contributions of the RCAs and leaf trees and our our planting regimes for the areas outside. At a landscape scale, complexity then is a reflection of that patchwork, that patchiness of stand types and ages, and it will vary by region over time. By region and over time. I think that's all I was going to say about complexity. Functional landscapes. It's not enough to simply think about stands. You have to scale up, and then there are additional considerations for how wildlife use landscapes, right? The intent of the strategy is to manage for habitat complexity as it enhances the function of many ecosystem services. Complexity is a key feature, and the following considerations are used to implement the strategy. The leaf tree requirements that we have are a big piece for providing for function, the RCAs, for function out in that production emphasis landscape. And then the stands and the habitat conservation areas are sort of the foundation of this strategy and provide the majority of of complex stands for Old Forest Associates and does so in a way that over time improves the function of those areas, both the connectivity among them, so the ability to move between them, and within any given patch, the function of that area as it grows towards more older forest. There's more interior habitat, there's less edge, etc. Next strategy is around rare and unique habitats. And this is just about targeting locations on the landscape that are unique and that support the life history needs of vulnerable species. So you've done all this work, and there's still some little spot. Maybe it's just as simple as wetlands, frankly, or as I mentioned, bat hibernacula. And so it's just acknowledging the truly rare and unique things on the landscape and protecting them or managing for them. Okay, moving on to recreation. Almost done. There's a strategy around welcoming, inclusive, and high quality recreation. It's just very lofty and broad goal. Strategies focused on reimagining the program in response to ongoing societal and demographic changes, and designing our infrastructure, programs, and services that are inclusive, sustainable, and welcoming. The intent is to develop opportunities in response to, that's a repeat, sorry. Okay. Next strategy is on visitor use, research, and monitoring. The intent is to monitor and adaptively manage visitor use to inform decisions related to the program and investments, to foster partnerships, and to support efforts to diversify the program's funding mechanisms, and also to help the program describe its contribution to GPV. The data collected will inform decisions about program investments and will, that's a repeat too. Sorry. I had no prep time on these slides. Okay. And then finally, one around community engagement. The intent of this strategy is to create a shared sense of, or a sense of shared ownership and community around the mission, vision, and brand of the recreation education and interpretation program through collaboration and engagement with diverse audiences, partners, and stakeholders, and thus, sort of increase support for the program, investment in the program, and increase our collective capacity to deliver services. Okay. Chapter 4, just really briefly, is the plan's guidelines chapter. It describes the processes for how the plan will be implemented and revised and how the public will be engaged in those processes. Guidelines generally describe how assets will be maintained or enhanced and how spending will be prioritized to achieve the resource management and goals. And additionally, it describes the adaptive management planning process and the revision process. Okay, on to next steps. Thanks for bearing with me.
All right. And I'm Justin Buttress for the record, policy analyst and rules coordinator for the State Forest Division. So just going to go through kind of quickly where we are with the rulemaking and then the next steps. So we're in the actual rulemaking process now as required by the Administrative Procedures Act. That started in November, which also kicked off the public comment period. That public comment period runs through the end of January, through the 31st. And we're also going to have 4 public hearings that are scheduled out into January. We wanted to make sure that people had as much time as possible to kind of look through the document, recognizing that it's pretty lengthy, and not schedule those sort of early in the process. So they're kind of there with just a couple weeks to spare. So they're scheduled. The first one is virtual on the 13th, and then we have one in Forest Grove on the 15th. Then we go to Tillamook on the 20th, and finally Eugene on the 22nd. We've also scheduled a public information session that precedes all of those. That's on the 6th. After the engagement and comment period closes, we'll work to summarize all of that feedback that we've received, all the comments, and we'll work to develop recommended changes to the forest management plan for the board's consideration to adopt the final FMP. Currently expecting that will happen at the June board meeting. Assuming the board adopts the forest management plan as an administrative rule in June, our attention will then turn to implementation of the forest management plan and developing operational plans that are consistent with the FMP and the HCP. During development of those implementation plans, we're going to continue to request engagement from our tribal partners and from our county partners, and expect that to begin in winter of 2026 and concluding in June of 2027. And of course, those processes will continue as part of our annual operations planning as well, those engagement processes, I mean. So with that, that's the next steps. And, thank you all for your time. I'll turn it back to Mike.
All right, thanks, Nick and Justin. And so, hopefully that gave you a good overview of some of those other resources, but we're happy to explore any further questions that you might have associated with those or any of the other goals and strategies for forest resources overall.
Thank you, Mike, and Nick and Justin. I am exhausted by the magnitude of what you have presented, and I'm struck by the wonderful vocabulary that it brings forth. Really, some great words that it takes to create a plan like this. But boy, I'm exhausted, and how you will move forward with prioritization almost overwhelms me. Commissioner Scar, do you have a question? We're going to have some questions from our group that hopefully you will be able to answer, and that we will be able to understand more about how this process can successfully move forward.
Sure, thank you. I have a number of questions that popped up during this. So it was interesting, you talked about how you took the ecologically sustainable forest management research that was done in 2011, 2012, something like that, and you adapted it for this. Is that actually, I mean, this is a new forest management plan since that time, so I assume this is a new basis or underpinning for this forest management plan. So is this new work for ODF to roll this in, or is this something you've already been doing? Help me understand, if I which I did, of course, Google ecologically sustainable forest management, like, how does that fit in, and is it new? And when you say adapt, what does adapt mean?
Mike, let me take a crack at that. Because, no, it's really not new. We made a mistake, I would argue, when we called what we did in 2001 structure-based management, because we like to define things for ourselves in unique ways. But the reality is what we've been doing for 25 years reflects ecological forestry in many ways, particularly on the structure-based management side. So this is really about kind of updating what we do, bringing it into the context of resilient forests and sort of the future. But the reality is the science has been there all along and even underpins our current plan.
Okay, gotcha. And when I read it does align well with generally what we do, right? I mean, it puts the importance of the environment, the importance of the social, the importance of the economic. So I mean, it is what sits inside greatest permanent value. But it was interesting to hear you use a different way to describe it than I'd heard before. And then as well, just to kind of Google that and go, what are they saying? So there may be more questions. I'm sure people outside of me will Google it and dig a little deeper and go, what is it they're saying? And how does that fit? Just because it was new for me. I'll keep talking while I have the mic just real quick. For education, for recreation, you mentioned under recreation goals, expanding access was one of those pieces. Also, there was some conversation about revenue for recreation. Of course, I sit on the State Forest Trust of Oregon, and so I'm a little deeper, engaged in some of that than others may be. But I do have a question around the recreation and the revenue. As we look at the full breadth of greatest permanent value, and we look at what harvest brings and the challenges we have with funding all of the state forest activities with harvest, what are we looking at for recreation? Are you looking at expanding that or charging? I mean, it's pretty greatly inexpensive at the moment. Is there a piece of that might grow and change when we start looking at metrics that will be tied to this, and how you will look at that and determine if recreation is achieving its metrics, and then fund it if that's what people most want?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the answer is yes, definitely something that we'll be looking at and reevaluating. So it was mentioned earlier the amount that we bring in. So the revenue from campgrounds in fiscal year 2025 was $364,000. And in some counties, actually, for instance, in Tillamook County, as you know, we collect the transient lodging tax and pass that through. And through an MOU, you say just keep all the revenue for the REI program in that county. So that works out pretty well. But obviously, the cost of implementing that program overall, recreation, education, interpretation, is more around $5 million a year for the department. So one of the things that we are focused on is trying to come up with some new metrics, and likely we're really not talking about. There's still ongoing discussions, preliminary discussions around what policy option packages might look like and what changes to key performance measures might look like. So we're really not ready to discuss those yet. But we don't really have a KPM, a legislative KPM around recreation at this point. And I think it's really important as we look at whether it's a KPM or whether it's a board performance measure or whatever, that we really look at how we're maintaining the access by maintaining critical infrastructure that's out there and what that costs, and using that as a prioritization. Our bridges and our culverts and our other key pieces of trail infrastructure, for example. And then there's the piece around sustaining the Tillamook Forest Center as well. And so there's a lot to do there. When we talk about the user data, that's definitely an area of growth. We have done a study based on anonymous cell phone data. It's just kind of how many people are in the area. They can take a survey if they want, which is great, always very helpful. So we know where our heaviest use areas are and maybe kind of how we can respond to that. When we talk about increasing access, I think there's an awareness piece associated with that. There's signage and so forth that will really help more people better understand their opportunities in the forest, and also the webpage and just all of that. But I think there's actually very specific things as well that we do look at grants for these things, and through the trust also looks for grants for these things. And it can be as simple as improving, making facilities more accessible in campgrounds, wheelchair access, that type of thing, making sure that everybody feels like, oh, okay, I can go here and there's something I can do. And that's really, regardless of a physical, limitation or whatever. And that's really important to us. I think the other thing too is making sure that we're really still meeting the needs, sort of the core needs of the user groups that help us a lot in recreation. So, we have a lot of trail partners, for instance, both for motorized and for non-motorized recreation. And, even though this is an expensive program for the department to put, to make sure that we fund on our side, it would be so much more expensive if we didn't have those folks, right? So there's a balancing act there in the prioritization because people tend to want more. And that's totally understandable, more trails for this and that and the other. So there's kind of like, well, we can't afford to just indefinitely expand those types of things, but maintaining certainly what is already there for those folks is a critical piece. And so that's really where the focus goes. And as we look at the asset management guidelines in the forest management plan, which really tier off of, how much money we have in our operating fund currently, and then what the projected revenues to that operating fund are. Then across the board, not just in the recreation education interpretation program, but across the board for our operations, we have to really prioritize what are the things that we really need to meet. And do we get to a place where we're actually having to defer maintenance on certain facilities or not? And how long can we go? And those are just the tough business choices that we have to make with the revenue with our revenue context. Did that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, it kind of does. I think what I would say is just as we look at greatest permanent value, in its full context as we're doing today, I think recreation is an important component of that, right? Certainly in Tillamook County, we're very aware that recreation is crucial, and I'm a user of the forest in many ways. And it's that challenge to balance the financial capabilities of ODF to do what the full range of GPV when harvest is the only funding that is available to do that. So I think it's just a piece of that conversation. And as we're talking about the FMP and talking about how we portray that piece of greatest permanent value, making sure we're acknowledging the challenge of, what people want versus what we can afford to do in that realm. It's an important part of the conversation. So thank you for that.
Oh, and I'm sorry. You also mentioned fees, which are extremely affordable. Right now on state forest, we are actually not. I believe it will be. We anticipate rulemaking in fiscal year 27 at some point to address that and actually to increase some of our fees. We are always very sensitive, however, to the fact that a lot of the people that use our forest, they have their own income limitations, and we don't want to price people out of the market. That would reduce access, and that's not our goal. So we try to be we'll be very judicious in how we do that, but that is
Certainly.
something that'll be coming up over the next year and a half or so.
Well, and I think as we look at what Oregon Parks and Recreation does as they work to walk that same line, and as they are beginning to understand and find spaces to recognize that when Oregonians recreate in Oregon's resources, that is one thing, and when we are a draw for others from out of the area, that's out of state, out of country, that's fantastic. And there is an opportunity there to keep things very affordable for Oregonians and allow our faraway visitors to help us maintain the resources that we have. So just encourage us to be mindful and learn from what OPRD is doing.
Thank you, Commissioner Scar, and thank you for those answers. And as I'm listening to your presentation, I was thinking priorities or reactive. I mean, you guys have walked kind of a difficult line as far as funding is concerned. I was happy to hear production of timber will be a prime focus, which seems to help with looking forward to generating revenue. So your comments on trying to raise some fees, I think people have to expect that things have to be paid for. And sometimes in government, we tend to allow people to think that because they already paid their taxes, we as county commissioners get that every day, that everything is paid for. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. So I appreciate those concerns. Commissioner Willie, do you have some questions?
Thank you, Chair. No, at this point in time, I really don't. It was a great presentation. I have a copy of the slide deck, so I was able to follow along as well. And I'll look forward to that meeting in Forest Grove on the 15th to follow up and participate more then. So thank you, Chair. No questions right now.
Thank you. Mr. Buffo, do you have any questions that you have that could enlighten us all?
Sure. Let me kind of go back to Nick. You had the some goals around the transportation system, and I'm just curious about the really kind of the costs associated with the transportation system, both from and maybe you could explain kind of the difference between what will happen on ODF lands under the HCP and the FMP versus what the new requirements for just the forest practices requirements are for roads, and how you think you'll be affected by if there's additional road costs kind of in the short term related to those requirements.
Um, Additional road costs for the new FPA rules? No, I don't think that there will be any. So currently we're functioning when we saw the rule changes coming up and just sort of the way that that's all structured, we made sure, got in there and established a stewardship agreement, whereby, that details how we will manage, and meet the Forest Practices Act, requirements associated with all those sorts of things. I mean, it doesn't address basic things around reforestation and some of those requirements, but around these germane resource protection strategies. So we know that we'll be meeting or exceeding actually the Forest Practices Act minimum. So I don't see any additional costs associated with that. Since you bring it up, I think there's key decisions for us to make moving forward in how we maintain our transportation asset. And there's a difference between the implementation of that in our general stewardship areas, where we're going to be more actively managing, versus our habitat conservation areas. And so we'll have to strategize around the management of existing transportation infrastructure, the maintenance of that infrastructure, because it does cost money. And there's some areas where it won't necessarily be a particular value, in terms of, at least in terms of timber management. Now, we do still have to maintain that infrastructure for habitat enhancement activities and those treatments in the HCAs where they occur, and we need to be cognizant of maintaining it for fire protection access as well. But those strategies are still being worked out, and that'll be part of implementation planning as well. We also, it's not like we're going to go out there and just vacate a whole bunch of roads all of a sudden in HCAs, for instance, because one, there's a lot of money associated required to vacate those roads, but also we need to make sure that we keep the right ones.
Yeah, these aren't wilderness areas, but we need to rethink. We don't want to be maintaining roads that we're not using, right? However, the HCAs are still key to the overall transportation network in a number of ways. One of the more important ways is the existing quarries therein. And so rock is very expensive. We had quarries that are in these sensitive sites already. We're not abandoning them. We just set up sort of how we will approach the use of said quarry in the conservation area. So quarries, borrow piles, um, stockpiles, like those are all things that are allowable, as well as there will be haul routes. And so we need to really think about how they're still supporting the timber emphasis areas, and minimizing costs, right?
It's kind of as your forest zones have changed, or will change in the HCP, you'll have to do some planning around how to operate day to day, it sounds like.
Yep.
Thanks. Thanks, Commissioner.
So Chair, may I ask another question?
Yeah, you may. I was going to ask if Mr. Persinger had any questions he wanted to ask, but please,
Always happy to yield, Madam Chair.
please, Commissioner Scar, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you. I was looking at, I know it was just a very brief one slide about the long-term carbon storage. And was just sort of curious in relation to that. We often talk about, so it says evaluate the actions with respect to carbon storage relative to a baseline. We always talk about, do we also count the carbon that is in harvested products. So that's one piece of it, is when we're talking about that relative to baseline as we're going forward, are we counting what's in harvested? And then the second one is, in the event of a natural disturbance, how does that change that sort of comparison to baseline? And do we suddenly come from a negative position and have to kind of make that up through actions and activities? When we really look into the forest management plan, what guidance does it give us on those two fronts?
So from the standpoint of the forest management plan itself, so it does recognize the value of carbon stored in harvested wood products, for sure. Um, uh, and all of the carbon pools that are out there. Now, the one that's easiest for us to speak to because we manage it directly is the amount of carbon stored in large trees, or sequestered by large trees, or through trees, period. But the question around disturbance is an interesting one. So we're not set up in a way that a deficit due to a natural disaster, natural disturbance, would necessarily put us in a bad way. I think it's simple. It's like you get set back, and it's kind of like, okay, the goal is still the same, to sequester more, but you've just changed what your new baseline is because of circumstances outside your control. Now, we will explore the possibility of a carbon project. We'll see what's out there. But I don't know what will be out there for us. It's difficult as a public land manager. I think we've talked about, those kinds of things before in terms of that. But carbon projects themselves, when they look, at least the reputable ones, will take this, and they usually have a bank. This isn't the right term, but you might think of it as a mitigation bank for disturbances that will occur, and that's sort of spread across all the projects that they manage, so that you don't get yourself in a bad way just because you had a fire or a windstorm or something like that. But that's project specific. So in the FMP, it really just speaks to sort of the means. For instance, HCA's are going to provide a huge carbon uplift. And then the rest of it really comes down, I think, mostly to what we'll be doing through the implementation plans wherever we land on a harvest level. As we've seen in the previous presentations, the general pathway of maximizing volume in that space around culmination of mean annual increment puts us in a really good spot there as well. So yeah, I don't think there's anything that would really hamstring us in the way that the FMP is currently written.
Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners or Mr. Buffo, or other comments? Oh, I see that. You have your hand raised, Mr. Buffo.
Got my hand up. No, just
Perfect.
kind of following up on the carbon project comment there, Mike. I'm just curious what the study might look like of that. Is that something, would you do that internally? Would you hire some external, carbon developer to help review your situation? Or do you have plans yet at this point for what that might look like?
I think we would pretty much have to put out a request for proposal. We put out a request for information. It was so, I guess, in its response, how many responses we got and what they said. Not to diminish what the respondents did, but I think it's just until you really get into the particulars, you don't know, and I don't think you get there unless you put out an RFP, somebody gives you an actual proposal for how their methodology and everything, and you select that and you go along with that. Or follow that process rather. So, in terms of, I am not an expert on the Elliott plan, but they did have a phased approach there where they did this sort of feasibility piece before and stepped into what that would look like and development of the actual plan. And we would have to do a similar process and have a vendor help us with that.
Thanks, Mike.
The responses we got were sort of at the one level higher than that. Hey, here are all the things, here are all the ways it's out there in the world, not necessarily let's take your land base and find a project. So that would be the next step for us.
Yes, Mr. Persinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have two questions. The first, you had a number of slides around the cultural resource protection, tribal relations, which greatly appreciated. Um, I'm curious, though, if you could maybe expand on it a little bit, since Oregon has a number of legal requirements as it pertains to interacting with tribes, significant cultural areas. DLCD just did a whole update to their cultural areas land use goals and protections. And so I was curious if the goals that ODF has, um, are those goals to identify and protect cultural resources and tribal access different than existing legal requirements?
They are, to an extent, not the protection of cultural resources. Those legal obligations are what they are. Um, and and there's not a rote prescription for how you do that. You do need to work with the tribes to make sure that whatever resource you've encountered, that you've, considered the full range of their concerns around that and are dealing with it. I think where it differs, though, our strategies, since we're managing a forest that's their ancestral lands, is around that access piece, um, for their use, and that's significantly different and in a different space than everybody else's use of that area. And I believe, a lot of it's really not that complicated. And it's through our regular conversations with them about what their concerns are. Sometimes it's literally just access to forest ground, and sometimes it's about specific things that they're interested in. So one of the things that I think that we have not done a lot of in the past, but I think might be increasing in the future is, for instance, they may identify an area that they're very interested in doing some, doing some of their cultural practices on, perhaps associated with cultivating certain native foods, practices that they would have done in the past, right, to do that, that they do on their own land still. And so it's kind of like that's a perfect place for us to be able to build that kind of into our implementation plan and then further into our AOPs, or at least making sure that our operations are complementing those types of things and not interfering with those types of things. So in that we're going beyond, obviously, I think what just rote legal requirements are, and we really want to engage in that partnership with them. The other thing, and it's not as much of an issue on our North Coast lands, but I think as we move further south and east, there's opportunities to really learn from them in the space around cultural burning or burning, right? Just prescribed fire and what we can do there. Um, and there's also, I'll just be very open about this. I would love to see where they have either treaty lands or fee lands that they bought, and that they're adjacent to state forests. Are there some wonderful cross-boundary management opportunities where we can all really realize a benefit? People talk about that a lot, and I think it's really, I would love for State Forest to be a leader in some really good examples of what that looks like. And because we have engagement with them um, from the FMP through the IP through the AOP and kind of this constant sort of conversation, I think that it'll be really I think we can get there. It'll be pretty easy to focus in on some of that as we grow the relationship.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I really, really appreciate that. And then I think my other question that I jotted down here actually is for well, either Mike or Justin. Has to do with the timeline. So you mentioned at the beginning, AOPs obviously are for 1 year, right? Annual operation plans, potentially moving to a 2 year process. IP for 10 years. The HCP is for 70. How long or what is the length of time that you envision for the FMP, knowing that, over the course of however long that is, you'll have to come back and make tweaks to it, right? As we probably would have to do with anything. But um, since this is supposed to complement the HCP, is the department's vision that this FMP is also for 70 years?
70 years or longer.
Okay.
So one of the reasons it's written at this broad, high level is so that it can accommodate a lot of adaptive management over time. Because we know that no matter what the situation is that we're looking at today, it's going to be different in 20 years, it's going to be different in 50 years. So it definitely needs to be able to accommodate change over that 70 years. The FMPs are not time bound. Our current FMP is not time bound. We do have a provision in our planning rules that basically says the board will review the FMP every 10 years. And they could step in at any time as well, but at least every 10 years they're going to review that plan. And it's like, oh, do we make any changes? Nope. All the strategies and goals are here, and it turns out that if any adjustments are needed, it's really just adjustments in implementation. Hey, State Forester, this is some changes we want to see. If there's something that comes up that's really outside the goals and strategies, then that could necessitate a revision. But I really think that the way it's written right now, it would be really amenable to adjustments over time. So I think it's quite durable.
I think that that's my list that wasn't already talked about, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioners? Wow. You guys got off kind of easy, I'd say. But we have all of those engagements and public comment times for you to look forward to also, where you might not get off as easy, but what we hope, Commissioner Scarf, did you have some closing comments?
Look, I do.
Oh,
Look, I
good.
do.
Oh, good. It's nice too. I've got a desk full of papers, as you see, and oh, you can't really see them because I've got my background, but I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready to celebrate Christmas.
Go, Margaret. Celebrate Christmas. So, okay, well, so my closing comments. I appreciate the conversation today. We do talk a lot about harvest, and as Chair Magruder brought up in the beginning, this is a whole plan, right? And so I think it was good today to kind of step back from that piece of it and talk about some of these other components and how they fit in and kind of how it all ties together. But I do think there is still an importance of talking about this plan, not necessarily specific to harvest, but in the context of the state's economic situation, because that does play into both harvest. It plays into what's possible. I mean, of the things we talked about today, many of them are going to require some investment, right? Whether it is the recreation, education, and interpretation, whether it is, the appropriate management of roads, all of the things, the cultural resource spaces and what may need to be invested within that work. So it's just, I think it's good to put it into the context of Oregon's economics, and remembering that the harvest is still an important piece, right? So we can't possibly get away from today without talking about how that is supporting the rest of those investments at this time, and that it also supports the jobs in our communities, and the research and the services that we need in local communities. So there is a piece here that we're all going to be working together on. I have no doubt in the coming few years, as we work together here, as we work within the harvest pieces that we have, and as we work with the legislature. So I think right now it's kind of interesting because the legislature and the governor have begun to talk about Oregon's economic situation. They've begun to talk about the need for accelerating Oregon's economic growth, for having more living wage, and for retaining and growing Oregon businesses. And so just a reminder that currently Oregon has lost 9,400 manufacturing jobs, 5% of total manufacturing jobs in the state. And an Eco Northwest report from 2024 shows that wood processors with jobs support 19% of the manufacturing in Oregon, and it is the third largest manufacturing sector in the state. So I think it's just an interesting time for us to be looking at and thinking about how do we work together with the state legislature and the governor as we work toward a strong economic environment in Oregon, and recognizing that with the ability to maximize harvest in the general stewardship areas, we can be a part of that. We can be a really good contributing part of that. So I think we want to keep that in mind. We want the board to keep that in mind, obviously, as we do this, and we want to make decisions with that at the forefront, along with everything else, right? We have an opportunity to be a part of Oregon's solution right now, if we do all of this right. So thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my closing comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Scar. I appreciate that uplifting message, because I think that as you folks with the department know, that it is the intention of the Council of Forest Trust Lands to work closely with you, with the Board of Forestry, with the legislature, with everyone, for the benefit of all of us. And I appreciate the hard work put into this management plan. And we will do everything we can to help you fulfill those goals of greatest permanent value. So we'll talk to Santa Claus and see if maybe we can get him to deliver all the things that we want. And we will be there at the public comment meetings to be supportive also, so that we can achieve the goals that we need to. Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to continuing to work together, both on these high level and on more specific issues as they come up. And I fully recognize the forest sector industry needs to be part of the solution to that. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't concerned, just in terms of the current market anyway, which hopefully will pick up in that. But I appreciate this collaboration, and feel free to reach out anytime. We can carve out more time to discuss these things on the FMP during this comment period. And then also, if you give me a call as an individual if you have any questions, or Nick as well, and more than happy to talk.
Thank you so much. I am sure that there will be more questions to come as we absorb all of this information. Thank you all. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
you.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.